The rain that evening in Los Angeles fell in thin, cold threads, gentle enough to seem harmless, but steady enough to blur the skyline into something almost spectral. Inside the glass tower of Spencer Publications, Bill Spencer stood before his window like a general surveying a battlefield. The city below glimmered with false calm, much like the people he dealt with daily, too proud, too cunning, and far too unwilling to admit weakness. He smiled faintly as his assistant left the room, closing the door behind her. On his desk lay a folder embossed with the Forrester Creations logo, a symbol of everything he was about to dismantle piece by piece. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Offer Katie Logan a position so lucrative, so empowering, that her acceptance would shatter not just the company that once dismissed her but also the man who had always underestimated her, Ridge Forrester. Katie had always been the heart disguised as the brain. Her brilliance with numbers and instinct for corporate politics had saved Forrester Creations from disaster more than once, yet she had never truly belonged there. She was a Logan among Forresters, an outsider in elegant rooms filled with shared bloodlines and unspoken hierarchies. And Bill knew that. He also knew the exhaustion behind her smiles, the way she rubbed her temple when meetings grew tense, the way her laughter had softened into something brittle since Eric Forrester's health began to decline again. Bill had been watching her for months, not just as a man haunted by old love, but as a strategist who understood that emotion, properly leveraged, could be the most profitable currency of all. The offer itself was simple but irresistible. An executive role at Spencer Publications overseeing global acquisitions, complete with creative autonomy and freedom from the politics that had plagued her at Forrester. Bill sold it not as recruitment, but as salvation. "You've spent your whole career fixing other people's mistakes," he told her during one of their dinners at a quiet restaurant overlooking the bay. "Maybe it's time to build something of your own." Katie listened, hands clasped tightly around her glass, the flickering candlelight reflecting in her eyes like small wars. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that leaving Forrester wasn't an act of betrayal, but self-preservation. Meanwhile, at Forrester Creations, Ridge was unraveling. Eric's health had taken another devastating turn. Subtle at first, a few moments of fatigue, then the more alarming signs. Tremors, confusion, an oxygen monitor that told truths the family refused to hear. The patriarch who had built an empire out of silk and vision was fading, and with him, the illusion of stability. The question of succession loomed heavier each day. Ridge, already burdened by leadership, began to realize how fragile his position truly was. He had always assumed talent and legacy were enough to protect Forrester from outside threats, but Bill Spencer's shadow was long, and his reach longer. When Ridge learned of Bill's offer to Katie, it struck him not as coincidence, but as a declaration of war. He knew Bill's methods. He didn't conquer by force, but by infiltration. Taking Katie wouldn't just strip Forrester of a key strategist, it would plant Spencer influence directly inside the company's core operations. Ridge could almost hear Bill's smirk as he imagined Forrester's designs, markets, and finances slowly bending towards Spencer control. What infuriated him most wasn't the business move itself, but the intimacy behind it. Bill wasn't just recruiting a professional. He was seducing an ally, a woman Ridge needed now more than ever. Not romantically, but as the one person whose judgment he trusted when the rest of the world felt like quicksand. Katie, caught in the center, felt the weight of two empires pressing against her from opposite sides. Bill's attention had always been intoxicating. There was a gravity in the way he looked at her, as though she were the only person capable of seeing through his armor. Ridge's reliance, on the other hand, was quieter but no less powerful. He leaned on her insight, her calm, her ability to translate chaos into reason. She knew both men in ways they didn't know themselves, and that made her dangerous, to them and to herself. Her heart, weakened once by illness and mended by hope, now stood on the edge of another collapse, not physical this time, but emotional. As the corporate tension tightened, personal histories began to blur with professional motives. Bill's version of the story was noble, almost romantic. He told mutual acquaintances that Katie had given too much to people who took her for granted, that he was merely rescuing her from an environment poisoning her peace of mind. "She's too good for them," he'd say in his boardroom, leaning back with that trademark confidence. "They'll work her to death and call it loyalty. I'm offering her freedom." The narrative spread quickly, whispered through networks of investors, stylists, and media insiders. Within days, Katie was no longer just a businesswoman being courted. She was the centerpiece of a corporate morality tale. Ridge, furious but trapped, couldn't publicly counter without appearing controlling. Instead, he turned inward, gathering the Forrester board for emergency meetings about structural integrity and ownership stability. Beneath the financial jargon, everyone knew what he meant. The company's soul was slipping away. Brooke tried to mediate, torn between her love for Ridge and her empathy for her sister. She told Ridge that Katie deserved to choose her own path, that perhaps Bill's offer wasn't manipulation but a chance for her to thrive. Ridge disagreed. "This isn't about her thriving," he said, his voice tight. "It's about him winning." Katie heard about the argument through whispers before Brooke admitted it to her. The knowledge made her feel sick, not because of Ridge's mistrust, but because deep down, she feared he might be right. Bill's concern for her health, his talk about stress and peace, had begun to sound less like affection and more like persuasion. Yet every time she tried to step back, he found another way to draw her in. Flowers delivered to her office, long calls late into the night about shared dreams, the unspoken reminder of the love they once shared and lost. "I just want you safe," he said once, his voice softer than she remembered it ever being. "You don't have to prove yourself to anyone anymore." But Katie had spent her entire life proving herself, to men, to companies, to a family that saw her as the dependable one but never the dazzling one. Her career had been her rebellion, her way of defining worth beyond beauty or romance. And now, as Eric's health failed and Forrester's power structure trembled, she stood at a crossroads that felt both professional and existential. If she stayed, she might preserve the company's stability but lose herself in its endless demands. If she left, she risked becoming a pawn in Bill's game, another conquest disguised as compassion. The tension came to a head at a Forrester board meeting called to discuss the future leadership plan in Eric's absence. Ridge wanted Katie to oversee financial operations temporarily, a move that would consolidate her influence and reaffirm her loyalty. Bill, having learned of the meeting through his usual network of spies, crashed the gathering uninvited. The room fell into stunned silence as he walked in, confidence radiating from every inch of him. "I came to make an offer," he said, sliding a contract onto the table. To her. The moment was electric. Brooke's face paled, Ridge's jaw tightened. Katie's eyes flicked between them, heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear Bill's pitch. It was the same proposal he had made privately, but hearing it delivered in Forrester's boardroom, surrounded by people who saw her as either asset or liability, transformed it into a spectacle. When he finished, the silence stretched, long and suffocating, until Ridge broke it with a single word: "Out." Bill's smirk didn't waver. "This is business, Ridge. Don't confuse it with your ego." Ridge stood, voice low but seething. "You don't get to use her to cripple this family." Katie rose before either could continue, her voice trembling but firm. "Enough." For the first time, both men fell silent. She looked at Ridge, then Bill, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and fury. "You talk about me like I'm a prize you can win, a move you can play. I'm not a pawn in your war." But even as she said it, she knew the decision would come with consequences no declaration of independence could erase. The next day, headlines announced her resignation from Forrester Creations. Bill's smile that morning was quiet but triumphant, until he saw the press release. Katie had accepted his offer, yes, but with a clause he hadn't anticipated. She would operate as an independent partner, not an employee. Her allegiance was to no one but herself. It was a masterstroke of strategy that no one saw coming. Ridge, both relieved and resentful, found himself admiring her defiance even as he feared its ripple effects. Bill, blindsided, realized that the woman he thought he could control had just outmaneuvered him in his own game. And Katie, standing on her new balcony overlooking the city, finally allowed herself to breathe. Yet beneath the calm, she knew peace was temporary, because power never sleeps. Within weeks, Forrester Creations and Spencer Publications were locked in a silent Cold War. Every contract, every press release, every leaked rumor became a move in an unspoken chess game. Bill launched aggressive acquisitions of Forrester suppliers, tightening the financial noose around Ridge's operations. Ridge countered by securing alliances with European investors once loyal to Spencer. The business pages turned their feud into a saga, dubbing it the Battle for Beauty. And at the center of every headline was Katie, her decisions dissected, her loyalty questioned, her face plastered across magazines as the woman both men want, but neither deserve. Her health began to falter under the strain. Headaches turned to dizzy spells. Sleepless nights became weeks of fatigue. Finn, now moonlighting as her physician, warned her of a possible relapse in her heart condition. "You need rest," he said gently. "Whatever this war is, it's not worth your life." She nodded, promising to slow down, but deep inside she knew the truth. She couldn't stop. Because for the first time, she wasn't just caught between men. She was shaping the game they played. When Eric's condition worsened to the brink of crisis, the two empires collided in full force. Forrester needed capital to fund a new design line dedicated to Eric's legacy. Bill offered financial backing, but only through Katie's division. Ridge saw it as infiltration, Katie as necessity. The board split down the middle, the tension palpable. As the vote neared, Katie's body finally betrayed her. She collapsed during a meeting, the stress and sleeplessness pushing her beyond her limits. For a brief, harrowing moment, the battlefield fell silent. At her bedside in the hospital, Ridge and Bill stood on opposite sides of the room, both realizing too late that their pride had nearly killed the woman they claimed to care for. When Katie awoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "You both keep saying you're fighting for me," she said weakly. "But all you've done is use me to fight each other." The truth cut sharper than any business deal. Bill turned away first. Ridge stayed but said nothing. When she was released days later, Katie made her choice, not in words, but in action. She withdrew from both companies, selling her shares to a neutral trust that funded independent designers and female entrepreneurs. She vanished from the public eye, leaving behind only a statement: "Peace is the only empire worth building." Months later, Forrester and Spencer stabilized, though neither ever fully recovered from the war that had nearly consumed them. Ridge found himself designing again, quietly, as though seeking forgiveness in creation. Bill returned to his empire, richer but lonelier, his reflection a reminder that some victories cost too much. And somewhere by the coast, in a quiet house surrounded by wild roses, Katie lived differently, painting, writing, rebuilding her health. The world still spoke her name in boardrooms and headlines, but she had finally learned the one truth neither man had understood: that real power was not control or conquest, but the courage to walk away. The war between Ridge and Bill became legend, a tale of pride and loss, ambition and love. But in the quiet spaces where no cameras could reach, Katie's laughter, lighter now, became the sound of something far rarer than triumph. It was freedom. Spring arrived in Los Angeles with a deceptive gentleness, sunlight sliding across the skyline like a secret no one wanted to say out loud. It had been nearly a year since Katie Logan disappeared from the epicenter of the Forrester, Spencer Cold War. Her departure had been as quiet as it was final. No press conference, no farewell speech, just a single envelope delivered to both Ridge and Bill, containing her resignation, a final audit of accounts, and one handwritten line: "You'll understand when you stop fighting." Neither man ever truly did. For Ridge, her absence had become a silence too loud to ignore. Forrester Creations survived, but something essential was missing. Without Katie's precision and foresight, the board fractured into competing interests. Thorne wanted control of the European branch, Thomas grew restless in design, and Steffi, ever the pragmatist, balanced their ambitions with the weight of her father's exhaustion. Eric's health stabilized for a time but left him frail and withdrawn, no longer able to mediate the quiet wars waged in his name. Ridge found himself designing late into the night, as though he could sketch his way back to a sense of order. But every line, every fabric swatch, reminded him of the woman who used to sit across from him in the boardroom, her quiet clarity cutting through the noise. Across the city, in the mirrored tower of Spencer Publications, Bill tried to fill the void with new conquests, hostile takeovers, charity galas, and affairs too brief to mean anything. His empire was thriving again. The press called him Spencer the Resurgent, but inside, he was restless. Katie's name still lingered in his thoughts, not as regret, but as unfinished business. He told himself he had respected her decision, but the truth was more complicated. Bill wasn't built to lose, especially not to Ridge, and especially not in matters of the heart. Her silence infuriated him because it was power he couldn't control. One morning, an anonymous article appeared in Financial Style Weekly, The New Renaissance of Female Leadership in Fashion. It detailed a quietly emerging fund that invested in independent designers, small, ethical labels run by women around the world. The article mentioned a mysterious founder known only as Kale, whose financial strategy and humanitarian model mirrored Katie Logan's brilliance too precisely to be coincidence. The fund's headquarters were listed not in Los Angeles, but in a small coastal town north of San Francisco. Bill read the article twice, then set it down slowly. It wasn't just that she had built something new, it was that she had done it without him, without Ridge, without the entire machinery of men who once defined her career. For the first time in years, he felt something he didn't recognize: humility. Ridge found out days later, and his reaction was entirely different. Relief. Hope. Guilt. They mixed in him like paint spilled across a clean canvas. For weeks, he debated whether to reach out. Brooke urged him to leave her alone. "Katie's finally at peace," she said. "Don't drag her back into your chaos." But peace had always been something Ridge mistrusted. It felt too much like surrender. The turning point came when Eric suffered a near-fatal relapse. The attack came suddenly: collapsed lungs, emergency surgery, the kind of moment that made time slow to a whisper. As the family gathered at the hospital, Ridge realized how fragile their world truly was. Forrester Creations, with all its glamour and legacy, was a house built on fragile hearts. The thought of losing his father, his anchor, forced him to confront every person he had pushed away, including Katie. Meanwhile, Bill's instincts as both a businessman and a man haunted by love kicked in. He began investigating Kiel Global quietly. Within weeks, his team confirmed what he already knew. Katie had founded the organization under a private trust, using the funds she'd withdrawn from both Forrester and Spencer accounts. Her first major investment was in a sustainable fabric factory that employed women who had been displaced by corporate downsizing, the very people both empires had ignored for years. She had turned her pain into purpose, her exile into revolution. Bill's admiration grew into something dangerous: resolve. He decided to find her. He arrived at the coast on a fog-heavy afternoon, the ocean hissing softly against the cliffs. Her house stood apart from the world, simple but luminous, surrounded by wild roses and salt-stained glass. Through the window, he saw her, painting again, hair tied back, sunlight tracing the edge of her profile. For a moment he hesitated. Then he knocked. Katie turned, startled. For a heartbeat, the years fell away. She looked exactly as he remembered, strong, composed, but with eyes that had learned to guard their peace. "Bill," she said quietly. It wasn't anger or affection, it was acknowledgement. He told her he was there not to win her back, but to understand. "You built something extraordinary," he said. "I came to see the woman who did what I couldn't." She listened in silence. Their conversation stretched into hours, long, unhurried, raw. Bill confessed his mistakes, his manipulations, the way power had blinded him. Katie spoke about freedom, about rediscovering herself outside the echo of men's ambitions. "I thought I needed to fight to prove my worth," she said softly. "But worth doesn't come from the war. It comes from walking away from it." When he left that evening, Bill felt something close to peace for the first time in decades. He didn't ask her to return. He didn't need to. He knew she had already rewritten the story without him. Weeks later, Ridge arrived. He came not as a CEO or a lover, but as a man humbled by time and loss. Eric's condition had worsened again, and Ridge had realized how fragile everything was, how much of life had been wasted on ego. When Katie opened the door, she could see the fatigue in his face, the weight of years spent fighting ghosts. "I don't want anything from you," he said quietly. "I just wanted to say you were right." Katie invited him in. They spoke of Eric, of legacy, of forgiveness. Ridge told her that Forrester was rebuilding, not around power or profit, but around meaning. He wanted her blessing to name a new foundation in Eric's honor, one that would work with Kale. Global to support ethical design and young artists. "It's what he would have wanted," Ridge said. For the first time, Katie smiled, not out of nostalgia, but respect. "Maybe you've finally learned what winning really means," she replied. When the partnership was announced months later, the fashion world reacted with disbelief. Forrester Creations and Kale, global, once divided by pride, were now united under a shared mission: to create without destruction, to lead without ego. The launch gala was subdued but beautiful. Eric, though frail, attended in a wheelchair, tears in his eyes as he watched the next generation take the stage. Ridge spoke briefly, his voice rough but clear. "This is for those who taught us that strength isn't domination, it's grace." Bill attended too, arriving uninvited but welcomed nonetheless. As he stood at the edge of the crowd, he caught Katie's eye across the room. She nodded an acknowledgement, a quiet truce. When the lights dimmed and a new collection walked the runway, ethereal designs made from sustainable fabrics, inspired by ocean light and rebirth, the applause rose like thunder. It wasn't just fashion, it was absolution stitched in silk. After the event, Ridge approached Katie outside, where the night air smelled of jasmine and rain. "I used to think love meant keeping someone," he said. "Now I think it means letting them be free." She looked at him, touched by the gentleness that age had finally taught him. "Freedom was all I ever wanted for all of us." The next morning, headlines called it the dawn of compassion capitalism. But beneath the media noise, something more human lingered. Bill, watching from his office, finally deleted the file labeled Forrester War. Ridge began spending more time with his father, less in the boardroom. And Katie, still painting in her seaside home, found herself no longer haunted by the choices that had once divided her life. One evening, as the sun sank into the Pacific, she opened her journal and wrote, "There are battles you win by surrendering. There are empires you build by walking away. And there are loves that don't end, they simply evolve into understanding." Somewhere in Los Angeles, the city lights flickered to life again, bright, unrepentant, beautiful. But for the first time, the war between Spencer and Forrester had no victors, no losers. Only survivors who had finally learned that peace, though fragile, was the only thing worth protecting. And in that rare quiet, Katie Logan, once the heart between two titans, became something greater than either of them had ever imagined, the balance that rebuilt the world they'd almost destroyed.
Oh,